Chapter 6. Kerfuffle Down in Round Brook. Like a bulldozer, Kitty shoved his toys and books under his bed. His mom had told him to clean his room and drop off his dirty clothes before leaving for the day. The boy ran to the laundry room, leaving a trail of shirts and socks, and dumped his clothes in the hamper. All he could think about was speaking to George about Graham. Just after breakfast, Kenny found himself back in the center of town. This time, however, it seemed like there were even more people milling about, and certainly quite a few who were not local. It was difficult for the boy to even navigate his bicycle down the street, so he hopped off and walked through the throng, worried about what had brought them all out. It didn't take long for him to find out that his suspicions were correct. There, on the corner of Main Street, old Pops Possum was describing his encounter with Graham. "It was as big as that building," he said, pointing at the Round Brook Inn. The crowd oohed. "With glowing, fiendish eyes and teeth like blood-dripping daggers. I'm sure it had killed and was washing the gory evidence away. I barely escaped with my life," he continued. The crowd ah. Kenny bent his head low as he passed, so that no one, especially old Pops, would see him. "This can't be happening," he muttered to himself. He turned the corner and ran smack dab into a band of roving minstrels, singing tales of terrible dragons, gallant knights, and beautiful maidens. As they moved gracefully past him, they were followed by a large pack of children with wooden play-swords battling each other, yelling, "I slay you, dragon! I slay you!" Watching in total shock as the kids ran down the street, Kenny bumped into a vendor pushing a large cart. "Dragon-embroidered tunics and tees!" the stout fellow yelled. "Get your official shirt with the Round Brook dragon on it!" He paused for a moment and looked down at Kenny. "You look like a small," he said, and dropped a shirt into the boy's hand. It was emblazoned with a cartoonish, goofy drake blasting orange fire. Kenny's eyes went wide. He threw the shirt to the ground and got back on his bike. He was in such a rush, he almost ran over a little girl biting the head off a dragon-shaped cookie. Regaining his composure, he found his way to the quiet alley where George's shop was. He slid off his bicycle and pounded on the heavy wooden door. The sign in the smudged window read, "Closed on Sunday." An elderly gentleman badger, older than his father, answered. He had gray hair and a white beard and mustache, and he spoke in gravelly, yet spirited voice. "Kenny, my lad, my squire, so very good to see you. Come in, he said as he welcomed the boy into the shop, locking the door behind him. They walked behind the counter, through the office, up the stairs, and into his little home on the second floor. "Charlotte mentioned you had stopped by. Can I get you a drink? Birch beer, perhaps?" Sure," Kenny replied, as he sat down in the study next to their ongoing chess game. The old fellow had taught the boy chess years ago, and from that day on there was always a game going. Because, George had once told him, in life you must plan your moves. Think before you act. Move toward a favorable outcome. Right now, Kenny couldn't think of chess strategies at all, or any sort of favorable outcome for Graham based on what he'd just seen in town. He glanced around the cluttered, dusty room. An antique clock ticked in the corner beneath a faded tapestry hanging on the wall. A large chest with a huge padlock was sitting in the opposite corner. Kenny didn't recall having seen it before, but there were so many books stacked on every available surface that it had likely been buried during his past visits. George walked in and sat down with two frothy mugs. "Here you go, son, drink up. It's your turn, you know," the old fellow said as he gestured toward the game. "So sorry that I missed you yesterday. I was beginning to wonder if you'd forgotten me. It certainly has been a while, and I've so much to tell you." "Me too," Kenny replied, and took a sip of his birch beer. "I am glad you returned the books you borrowed. I sold all our copies of the King's Royal Bestiary last night, and I had to order more. It seems like everyone is in a frenzy over this dragon sighting. But I can tell you, it will be over quite soon." At this statement, Kenny's Riverstone stomachache returned, but he had to remain calm, and carefully explain to the old-timer about Graham. If anyone could help his friend out of this mess, it would be George. He made his move on the chessboard. Rook takes pawn. "Bold move!" the codger exclaimed, and moved his knight forward. "So there's this exciting news I want to tell you about." "Can I tell you first?" Rook takes bishop. "Of course, lad. Spit it out." Kenny took a sip from his mug. "I made a new friend." "A new friend, you say, from school? Have you been playing chess with him?" George chuckled. "Because you're certainly giving me quite a wallop on the battlefield today." "Not from school, no. Actually, he's new in town, and I really want to introduce you to him. I think you guys will really get along." "A friend of yours is a friend of mine. By all means, bring the lad by. In fact—" There was a knock at the door. With a hold-that-thought gesture, George ran downstairs and answered it. Kenny couldn't see much from where he was sitting, but it sounded like someone was delivering a package. "A friend of yours is a friend of mine," he said to his mug, and smiled. Perhaps this wasn't going to be so difficult after all. The stomach ache began to fade, and he heard a hearty "Thank you, sir," from downstairs, right before the door slammed shut. George returned to his study, holding a large, ornately sealed scroll. He was smiling from ear to ear. He sat down on the trunk with the large padlock. "What?" Kenny said. "What is it?" "Yesterday I received word from the royal palace, officially requesting me to come out of retirement," George said, pointing to some letters on his desk. So it was true. The old-timer really had worked for the king, after all. His stories of life as a cavalier and armored horseman were real. "And today," George said as he held up the scroll, "I received my official orders for one final task. And it is a most honorable task, I might add." "Orders?" Kenny asked. But the answer was slowly dawning on him. He glanced down at the trunk with the padlock. On a small, rusty brass plate it read, "From His Majesty's Royal Armory, property of George E. Badger." King. Orders. Armor. George was a knight. The old gent stood gallantly, opened the scroll, cleared his throat, and read, "My dear George, it has been ages since we last spoke. I do hope this letter finds you still in the best of health, and your little shop thriving. The court has never quite been the same since you retired. If I may be so bold as to get right to the point, I would ask one last request requiring your special skills for our great land. It seems there is a bit of a kerfuffle down in Round Brook that only you can resolve. I do hope you are up for it, as there is no one else in all our land who can handle this as well, and as professionally as you. You're such a saint for doing this. As always, I remain your faithful friend and ruler, the King. P.S. Don't let me down. I've bet 4-1 you'll be triumphant. P.P.S. Can you send over a copy of the bestiary? I seem to have misplaced mine. George stood with his hands on his hips, clearly invigorated by the letter. Well, what do you think of that? The river stone had expanded beyond Kenny's stomach. He could feel it pressing into his throat. He knew what George was going to say, but he had to ask. He needed to know for sure. What is it that he is asking you to do? The king opened the trunk, revealing a complete suit of armor. It was elaborately engraved, yet tarnished in spots. My dear boy, he said, pulling out a long, gleaming sword, I am his devil dispatcher, his scourge remover. I am the kingdom's #1 dragon slayer.